You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The creak of the cabin door made my blood run cold. I'd been alone in these woods for days. But now, as the handle slowly turned, I realized my solitude had been an illusion. Someone was here, and judging by the hushed whispers and metallic clicks I heard outside, they weren't the welcoming kind. It had all started as a simple solo hiking trip. I'd been planning it for months, eager to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. The Appalachian Trail seemed like the perfect challenge, beautiful, rugged, and just remote enough to offer the solitude I craved. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. I reveled in the crisp mountain air, the stunning vistas, and the profound silence that settled over the forest at night. My muscles ached from the long days of hiking, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that reminded me I was alive and pushing my limits. On the fourth day, the weather took a turn. Dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them a torrential downpour that showed no signs of letting up. I knew I needed to find shelter, and fast. That's when I spotted it, an old cabin, half hidden among the trees. At first, I was relieved. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows dark and a thick layer of moss covering the roof. But it was sturdy, and more importantly, it was dry. I figured I could wait out the storm there and continue my journey once the rain passed. I approached cautiously, calling out a hello just in case someone was home. When no answer came, I tested the door. To my surprise, it swung open easily, hinges creaking in protest. The interior was musty, but surprisingly well preserved. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but the furniture was intact. A small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a narrow bed against the far wall. It looked like whoever had lived here had simply walked away one day and never returned. I set down my backpack and started to explore. There were a few old canned goods in the cupboards, their labels faded but still readable. A collection of dusty books lined a small shelf, mostly field guides and local history. It was clear that whoever had lived here had been a true outdoorsman. As the day wore on and the rain showed no signs of stopping, I decided to make the best of the situation. I got a fire going in the stove, its warmth driving away the damp chill. I even found an old deck of cards and spent the evening playing solitaire by candlelight. It was almost cozy. For the first time in days, I felt truly relaxed. The patter of rain on the roof and the crackling of the fire lulled me into a sense of security. I fell asleep that night, feeling safe and content. I woke the next morning to find the rain had stopped, but a thick fog had settled over the forest. Visibility was poor, and I knew trying to navigate the trail in these conditions would be foolish. I resigned myself to another day in the cabin, grateful for the shelter. It was mid-afternoon when I first noticed something odd. As I was reorganizing my backpack, I could have sworn I saw movement outside the window. Just a flicker in the mist, gone almost as soon as I'd seen it. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a deer, maybe, or a large bird. But then I heard it, a twig snapping, followed by the unmistakable sound of hushed voices. My heart began to race. I moved to the window, straining to see through the fog. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, like ghosts materializing from the mist, I saw them. 3 figures, moving with purpose towards the cabin. Panic set in. Who were they? What did they want? My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Lost hikers wouldn't move with such stealth. Rangers would announce themselves. No, these people, whoever they were, didn't want to be seen. I looked around frantically for a place to hide. The cabin was small, with few options. Under the bed, too obvious. The cupboards, too small. My eyes landed on a hatch in the ceiling I hadn't noticed before. An attic. With shaking hands, I pulled down the ladder and climbed up, pulling my backpack after me. I had just managed to close the hatch when I heard them at the door. The creak of hinges, footsteps on the wooden floor. Then, voices. "Somebody's been here," a gruff male voice said. "Fire's still warm. Check outside." Another voice, female this time. "Make sure they didn't just step out." I held my breath, afraid even the sound of my heartbeat might give me away. Through gaps in the floorboards, I could see them moving around below. 3 of them, just as I'd seen outside. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark clothing. "Bag here," the second man said. "Hiker, probably." "Shit," the woman hissed. "If they made it this far..." "We'll find them," the first man assured her. "Can't have anyone stumbling onto our operation. Boss would have our heads." Operation? My mind reeled. What had I stumbled into? They continued to search the cabin, rifling through my belongings. I watched, helpless, as they went through my wallet, looking at my ID. "Sarah Jenkins," the woman read aloud. "Got an address in Boston. Long way from home, aren't you, Sarah?" I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. They knew my name. They knew where I lived. The gravity of my situation hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just criminals I'd stumbled upon. They were dangerous, and they now saw me as a threat. "We'll need to move everything," the first man said. "Can't risk her finding her way back here and bringing the cops." "What about the girl?" the second man asked. There was a long pause. My blood ran cold as I waited for the answer. "We find her," the woman said finally, her voice hard, "and we make sure she never tells anyone what she saw." They continued to talk, discussing plans to search the surrounding area. I remained frozen in the attic, scarcely daring to breathe. Hours passed. At some point, they left the cabin, but I was too afraid to move, certain they were still out there, searching. As night fell, I heard them return. They spoke in low voices, frustrated by their lack of success in finding me. They decided to sleep in shifts in order to catch me if I tried to return in the night. I knew I couldn't stay in the attic forever. Sooner or later, they'd think to look up here, or I'd make a noise and give myself away. I had to escape, but how? The answer came to me as I listened to the sound of gentle snoring below. 2 asleep, 1 awake. It was the best chance I was going to get. Moving as silently as I could, I eased open the attic hatch. The cabin was dark, lit only by the faint glow of dying embers in the stove. I could make out 2 figures on the bed, and a third silhouette by the window. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It was now or never. I dropped from the attic, landing as softly as I could. The figure by the window whirled around, but I was already moving. I grabbed the cast iron pan from the stove and swung with all my might. There was a sickening thud, and the figure crumpled. The noise woke the others, but I was already at the door. I burst out into the night, my legs pumping furiously as I ran blindly into the forest. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the crash of underbrush as they gave chase. I ran like I'd never run before, ducking under branches and leaping over fallen logs. My lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, but fear kept me going. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the normal nighttime noises of the forest. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't risk it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I finally allowed myself to slow down. I was lost, exhausted, and terrified. But I was alive. It took 2 more days of cautious travel before I found my way to a ranger station. The authorities were skeptical of my story at first, but a search of the area revealed evidence that corroborated my account. The cabin, and when they found it, had been cleared out, but traces remained of what the police called a insignificant illegal operation. As I gave my statement and tried to come to terms with what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to becoming another statistic, another mysterious disappearance in the vast wilderness. My peaceful hiking trip had turned into a nightmare, one that would haunt me for years to come. But as I boarded the bus back to Boston, I realized something. I had survived. I had outsmarted them, outrun them. They had tried to make me a victim, but instead, they had made me a survivor. The mountains still called to me, their beauty undimmed by my ordeal. I knew I would return someday to finish the journey I had started, but next time, I wouldn't be alone, and I would carry with me the knowledge that sometimes the greatest dangers we face aren't from nature, but from our fellow human beings. The moment the truck veered towards me, I knew this was no accident. The murderous intent in the driver's eyes was clear even through the rain-streaked windshield. As I swerved off the road, my tires skidding on the wet asphalt, one thought blazed through my mind. They had found me, and they weren't going to let me escape this time. It had all started 3 days ago. I was driving cross-country, moving from New York to Los Angeles for a fresh start after a messy divorce. The long, lonely stretches of highway through the Midwest were monotonous, but I found a strange peace in the solitude. That peace was shattered at a nondescript gas station just outside of Omaha. I was filling up my tank when I noticed two men arguing near the convenience store. It seemed heated, but I didn't think much of it until I heard a gunshot. The next few moments were a blur. One man fell, clutching his chest. The other looked around wildly, his eyes locking with mine. I saw the gun in his hand, saw the panic and desperation on his face. In that instant, I knew I had become a witness to something I was never meant to see. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the gas station, I saw the man running towards me in my rearview mirror. I hit the highway doing 90, my heart pounding in my chest. For the next few hours, I drove like a woman possessed, constantly checking my mirrors, sure that at any moment I'd see a car in pursuit. When I finally allowed myself to slow down, I realized the gravity of my situation. I had witnessed a murder, and the killer had seen me. I was the only thing standing between him and freedom. I debated going to the police, but fear held me back. What if they didn't believe me? What if the killer had connections? People who could find me even if I went into protective custody? Paranoia, fueled by too many crime dramas and my own terrified imagination, made every option seem dangerous. So I kept driving, pushing on through the night, through 3 states. I avoided main highways, sticking to back roads and small towns. I paid for everything in cash, used fake names at motels, and kept my interactions with people to a minimum. By the 3rd day, exhaustion was taking its toll. The constant vigilance, the lack of sleep, the gnawing fear in my gut. It was all becoming too much. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. I needed to make a decision to find help. That's when I saw the truck. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another vehicle on the road. But as the miles ticked by, I noticed it was always there, a few cars back, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. Paranoia flared. Was I imagining things? Had lack of sleep made me jumpy? I took a random exit, heart in my throat as I watched my rearview mirror. The truck followed. Panic set in. I accelerated, weaving through the light traffic on the county road. The truck kept pace, getting closer now, no longer trying to hide its pursuit. Rain started to fall, fat drops splattering against my windshield. I turned on my wipers, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That's when the truck made its move, pulling up alongside me. I risked a glance over, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't the killer from the gas station. This was someone new, someone I'd never seen before. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was here to silence me. The truck swerved towards me, metal screeching as it scraped along the side of my car. I jerked the wheel, desperately trying to keep control. We were on a bridge, concrete barriers on either side leaving no room for error. Another vicious swerve from the truck sent me spinning. I felt a moment of weightlessness as my car broke through the barrier, then a sickening lurch as gravity took hold. The world outside my windows became a blur of gray sky and dark water as my car plummeted towards the river below. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Cold water rushed in through shattered windows as the car began to sink. Training from a long-ago swimming class kicked in. Wait for the car to fill with water. Then the pressure will equalize and you can open the door. But panic is a powerful thing. As the water rose past my chest, my seatbelt refused to unlatch. I clawed at it frantically, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as the water reached my chin, the belt finally gave way. I took one last, desperate gulp of air as the car was fully submerged. The pressure inside equalized, and I managed to force the door open. I swam out, my lungs burning, my clothes dragging me down. The surface seemed impossibly far away. My vision started to darken around the edges. Just as I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, my head broke the surface. I gasped, sucking in great lungfuls of air. The current was strong, dragging me downstream. I could see the bridge in the distance, the broken barrier where my car had gone through. There was no sign of the truck or its driver. I managed to make it to the shore, dragging myself out of the water on trembling limbs. I collapsed on the muddy bank, coughing and shivering. I was alive, but I knew this was far from over. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation sank in. I was miles from anywhere, soaking wet, with no car, no phone, and no idea who was after me or why. The killer from the gas station was bad enough, but now there were others involved. This was bigger than I had imagined. I couldn't stay here. Whoever had run me off the road would surely come looking to confirm I was dead. I forced myself to my feet, my body protesting every movement. I needed to find help, but I couldn't trust anyone. For all I knew, the killer had contacts in law enforcement. No one was safe. I started walking, following the river downstream. My wet clothes clung to me, chafing with every step. The rain had stopped, but a cold wind had picked up, cutting through my sodden jacket. I hugged myself for warmth, trying to ignore the tremors that racked my body. As night fell, the full moon provided just enough light to navigate by. I stuck to the cover of trees along the riverbank, jumping at every snapping twig or rustle of leaves. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who were these people? Why were they so desperate to silence me? What had I stumbled into? After what felt like hours of walking, I saw lights in the distance. A small town, nestled in the valley. Civilization, and with it, the promise of help, but also the threat of discovery. I approached cautiously, sticking to shadows. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of businesses and houses. A diner on the corner was still open, warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten in nearly a day. But food would have to wait. I needed information and a way out of here. My eyes landed on a small building across the street, the local library. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Breaking in was easier than I expected. Small towns and their trusting nature. The window latch was flimsy, giving way with minimal effort. I slipped inside, praying there was no alarm system. The computer at the front desk was ancient, but it worked. I Googled the gas station where this had all started, searching for any news about a shooting. Nothing. It was as if it had never happened. I broadened my search, looking for any recent crimes or suspicious activities in the area. That's when I found it. A small article about a string of unexplained disappearances along the I-80 corridor. Truckers, mostly, gone without a trace. The police had no leads, but locals whispered about a shadowy organization, a modern-day highway pirates preying on unsuspecting travelers. My blood ran cold as I read. Had I stumbled upon something bigger than a simple murder? Was this why they were so desperate to silence me? A noise outside made me jump. Headlights swept across the window as a car drove by slowly. Too slowly. I ducked down, my heart pounding. Had they found me already? I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like an eternity. When I finally dared to peek out, the street was empty. But I knew I couldn't stay here. It wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. As I slipped out of the library and into the night, I knew my ordeal was far from over. I was in way over my head, caught up in something I didn't understand. But I was alive, and as long as I was breathing, I had a chance. I started walking again, this time with purpose. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop. They were out there, watching, waiting, and I was determined to stay one step ahead, no matter what it took. The road stretched out before me, dark and full of unknowns. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had survived their first attempt to silence me. I had information now, a piece of the puzzle. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I walked into the unknown, one thought kept me going. I would find the truth, and I would make them pay. They had tried to kill me, but they had only made me stronger. And now, I was coming for them. The first video file I opened showed a man being tortured. The second revealed a drug deal gone wrong. By the third, I realized the laptop I'd bought wasn't just used. It was evidence of something far more sinister. And now, as I stared at the car parked across the street, I knew they had come for it, and for me. It all started innocently enough. My old laptop had finally given up the ghost after years of faithful service. And as a freelance graphic designer, I couldn't afford to be without a computer for long. Money was tight, so I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a decent used machine that wouldn't break the bank. That's how I met Derek. His ad seemed perfect, a high-spec laptop for a fraction of its retail price. When I arrived at the coffee shop to meet him, I found a nervous-looking guy in his 30s, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "You must be Alex," he said, forcing a smile. "Here's the laptop. It's all yours." I gave it a quick once-over. It looked to be in good condition, and when I booted it up, everything seemed to work fine. I handed over the cash, and Derek practically bolted out of the cafe. At the time, I chalked it up to social awkwardness. If only I'd known. Back home, I spent the evening setting up my new purchase, transferring files and installing software. It was close to midnight when I stumbled upon the hidden folder. It was buried deep in the system files, innocuously named Backup Data. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. What I saw made my blood run cold. Video files, hundreds of them, with names like Warehouse Pickups 03 and Johnson's Interrogation. My finger hovered over the mouse, a voice in my head screaming not to open them. But I had to know. The first video started playing, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. A man, bloodied and bruised, was strapped to a chair. Off camera, someone was asking questions, their voice distorted. When the man refused to answer, his fingernail was slowly pulled off with pliers. His screams would haunt my nightmares for weeks to come. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. What had I gotten myself into? Who was Derek, really? And more importantly, who were the people in these videos? Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, debating what to do. Go to the police. But what if they were involved? The level of organization I'd glimpsed in those files suggested this wasn't some small-time operation. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know more before I did anything. I spent the day combing through the files, careful not to actually open any more videos. There were documents, ledgers, shipping manifests, what looked like coded messages. It was clear I'd stumbled onto something big, something dangerous. As evening fell, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It could have been nothing, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I peered out through the blinds, and my heart nearly stopped. A man was sitting in the driver's seat and staring directly at my apartment. Panic set in. They knew. Somehow they'd tracked the laptop to me. My mind raced through possibilities. Had Derek sold me out? Was the laptop itself being tracked? I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but stopped short. Who could I trust? If this organization was as big as I suspected, they could have people anywhere. A plan began to form. I couldn't stay here, that much was clear. But I couldn't just run either. Not with what I knew. I had a responsibility now, a duty to expose whatever this was. I quickly packed a bag, clothes, some cash I had stashed away, basic toiletries. Then I turned to the laptop. I couldn't risk taking it with me, but I couldn't leave it behind either. I pulled out the hard drive, slipped it into my bag, and then, in a moment of inspiration, replaced it with the drive from my old laptop. To anyone checking, it would look like an ordinary computer. Just as I finished, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. "Mr. Wilson," a deep voice called out. "We need to speak with you about a recent purchase you made." I didn't answer. Instead, I quietly made my way to the fire escape outside my bedroom window. As I climbed down, I heard the sound of my front door being broken down. My feet hit the alley pavement, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop. The sound of shouts behind me spurred me on. I ran for what felt like hours, taking random turns, doubling back, anything to lose any potential tail. Finally, exhausted and out of breath, I ducked into a 24-hour diner. The waitress gave me an odd look as I slid into a booth, but didn't say anything. I ordered a coffee with shaking hands, then pulled out my phone. I needed help. But who could I trust? An idea struck me. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. She worked as an investigative journalist for the local paper. If anyone could help me make sense of this and get the information to the right people, it was her. I dialed her number, praying she'd pick up despite the late hour. "Alex?" she answered, her voice groggy with sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I need your help," I said, my voice low. "I'm in trouble. Big trouble. And I think I've uncovered something huge." There was a pause. "Are you drunk?" "I wish I was," I replied. "Can you meet me? Please? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." She must have heard the desperation in my voice. "Okay," she said finally. "Where are you?" I gave her the address of the diner, then hung up. As I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every person who entered made me flinch. Every car that drove by seemed suspicious. Sarah arrived about 20 minutes later, looking concerned and a little annoyed. "All right, Alex," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, then told her everything. As I spoke, her expression changed from skepticism to shock, and finally to a grim determination I recognized from our days together. The look she got when she was onto a big story. "Show me," she said when I finished. I pulled out my laptop and booted it up. Her eyes widened as I opened file after file, revealing the scope of what I'd discovered. "Alex," she said slowly, "do you realize what this is? This isn't just some criminal organization. This is evidence of corruption at the highest levels. Politicians, police chiefs, judges, they're all implicated in these files." My mouth went dry. "What do we do?" Sarah thought for a moment. "We can't go to the police, not yet. We need to verify this information, find corroborating evidence, and we need to keep you safe." She pulled out her own laptop and began typing furiously. "I'm emailing my editor. We're going to need resources for this protection." As she worked, I glanced out the window. My heart nearly stopped. The dark sedan from earlier was pulling into the parking lot. "Sarah," I hissed, "we need to go. Now." She looked up, saw my expression, and nodded. We quickly packed up our things and headed for the back exit. As we slipped out into the night, I heard shouts behind us. They'd found us. "My car's this way," Sarah said, grabbing my hand. We ran through alleyways and side streets, the sound of pursuit never far behind. We finally reached her car, an old but reliable Honda Civic. As we peeled out of the parking spot, I saw two men round the corner, their faces twisted with anger. "Where are we going?" I asked, as Sarah navigated the empty streets. "I have a cabin upstate," she replied, her eyes on the road. "It's off the grid. We'll be safe there while we figure this out." As the city lights faded behind us and the highway stretched out ahead, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. In the span of 24 hours, my life had been turned upside down. I was a fugitive, running from shadowy forces I didn't fully understand. But I wasn't alone. And for the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever I'd stumbled into, whatever dangers lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: the truth would come out. It had to. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I made a silent vow. I would see this through no matter the cost. The laptop I'd bought on a whim had thrust me into a world of danger and intrigue, but it had also given me a purpose, and I was determined to see it through to the end. The first shadow I saw could have been a trick of the light. The second, maybe my imagination running wild. But when I heard the whispers coming from behind the walls, I knew with chilling certainty that I wasn't alone in this sprawling, haunted mansion. And whatever was in here with me, it wasn't human. I'd taken the job as an overnight caretaker at Ravencrest Manor out of desperation. Fresh out of college with a mountain of student debt and no promising job prospects. The ad had seemed like a godsend. Historic mansion seeks live-in caretaker. Night shifts only. Excellent pay. It seemed too good to be true. And as I was learning, it probably was. The interview had been odd from the start. The owner, a reclusive old woman named Mrs. Blackwood, had peered at me through thick glasses, her eyes magnified to an unsettling degree. "You're not afraid of the dark, are you, dear?" she'd asked, her voice raspy and thin. I'd laughed nervously. "No, ma'am, not at all." She'd nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. You'll need a strong constitution for this job. The nights can be long at Ravencrest." I should have heeded the warning in her words, but the promise of a paycheck and a roof over my head had overridden any misgivings. My first night at Ravencrest had been uneventful, if a bit eerie. The mansion was massive, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity with more rooms than I could count. My duties were simple: patrol the halls, ensure all doors and windows were locked, and report any disturbances. Simple enough, I thought. It was on my third night that things began to get strange. I was making my usual rounds when I heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from one of the unused bedrooms. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling as I pointed it at the closed door. The humming stopped abruptly. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, just as I'd convinced myself I'd imagined it, a giggle, high-pitched and childlike, it sent shivers down my spine. I approached the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room was empty, moonlight streaming through the large windows and illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. But there, in the center of the room, was a small handprint in the dust on the floor. A child's handprint. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe the day staff were hazing the new girl. But as the nights wore on, the incidents became harder to explain away. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. Doors I'd sworn I'd locked would be wide open on my next pass. And always, the feeling of being watched. It came to a head on my 7th night. I was in the mansion's vast library, reshelving some books that had mysteriously ended up on the floor. As I reached up to place a heavy tome on the top shelf, I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down, expecting to see a mouse, or maybe one of the mansion's many stray cats. Instead, I saw a small, pale hand reaching out from behind a bookcase. I stumbled back, books clattering to the floor around me. The hand retreated, and I heard that same childlike giggle from before, this time accompanied by the patter of small feet running away. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Whoever's doing this, come out now." The only response was the creaking of the old house settling. I ran from the library, no longer caring about my duties or my job. I just wanted out. But as I reached the main foyer, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A figure stood at the top of the grand staircase. It was Mrs. Blackwood, but not as I'd seen her before. She looked younger, somehow. Her hair was black instead of gray, her posture straight and regal. "Leaving so soon, my dear?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "What's going on here?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What is this place?" She smiled, and in that moment, she didn't look human at all. Ravencrest has always attracted the young and the desperate. It feeds on them, you see. Their fear, their vitality. As she spoke, more figures began to appear. Children in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes hollow and dark. A man in a butler's uniform with a gaping wound in his chest. A woman in a maid's outfit, her neck bent at an impossible angle. "What are you?" I whispered, backing towards the door. Mrs. Blackwood's smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "We are the caretakers of Ravencrest. And now, my dear, so are you." I turned and ran, yanking at the front door. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, I could hear them approaching, their whispers growing louder. In desperation, I grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and smashed it against the nearest window. The glass shattered, and I dove through, ignoring the cuts and scrapes as I tumbled onto the overgrown lawn. I ran into the night, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where a passing trucker took pity on me and gave me a ride into town. I went to the police. Of course, told them everything. They listened politely, then informed me that Ravencrest Manor had burned down in 1954. There was nothing there but an empty, overgrown lot. I didn't believe them. I couldn't. The next day, I drove back out to the mansion, determined to prove I wasn't crazy. But there it was, just as the police had said, a sprawling out empty lot, overgrown with weeds and scattered with the charred remnants of a long-ago fire. No mansion, no Mrs. Blackwood, no ghosts. As I stood there, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew I had experienced, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in the tall grass, was a glint of something metallic. I approached cautiously, my heart in my throat. It was the candlestick, the one I'd used to break the window. It lay there, impossible and undeniable. A piece of evidence from a place that supposedly didn't exist. I left it there, too afraid to touch it. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw the mansion, standing tall and imposing against the sky, and in an upstairs window, a pale face watching me leave. I never went back to Ravencrest. I moved out of state, changed my name, did everything I could to put that night behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, still see the shadows moving in the corners of my vision. And I wonder, did I ever really leave Ravencrest at all? Or is it still there, waiting for me, ready to claim its newest caretaker? The job offer still appears sometimes, in small local papers or on obscure websites. Historic mansion seeks live-in caretaker, night shifts only. Excellent pay. And I know somewhere out there, another desperate soul is seeing it, thinking it's the answer to their prayers. I want to warn them, to tell them to run, to stay away from Ravencrest and its hungry ghosts. But who would believe me? Who would listen to the ravings of a person who claims to have worked in a mansion that burned down decades ago? So I stay silent, and I watch, and I wait. And every night, I check my doors and windows, and I leave a light on, because I know now that the dark isn't empty. And sometimes, if you look too long into the shadows start looking back. The experience at Ravencrest changed me. I no longer see the world as I once did. Every old building holds secrets, Every shadow could hide something unnatural. I've become a collector of strange stories, a seeker of the unexplained, because I know now that there's more to our world than most people ever see. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the house creaks, I find myself longing for the long corridors of Ravencrest, for the whispers in the walls and the giggle of ghostly children, because as terrifying as it was also thrilling. It was real in a way that nothing in my life has been since. But then I remember Mrs. Blackwood's smile, too wide and too sharp, and the cold touch of spectral hands, and I know that some doors once opened can never truly be closed again, so I stay away and I warn others as best I can. But a part of me knows that someday, somehow, Ravencrest will call me back, and when it does, I don't know if I'll have the strength to resist its siren song, because once you've glimpsed the other side, the normal world never quite feels like home again. The moment I saw the townspeople's eyes, I knew we had driven into something far worse than a simple pit stop. There was a vacancy in their stares, a hollowness that sent chills down my spine. As my wife asked for directions, I realized with growing horror that we hadn't found help. We had stumbled into a trap. It had started as a routine road trip. Sarah and I were driving cross-country to her parents' place for Thanksgiving. We'd done this drive a dozen times before, but this year we decided to take a scenic route, hoping to see some of the charming small towns that dot the American landscape. That decision would prove to be a grave mistake. We were somewhere in the Midwest, surrounded by endless fields of corn and wheat, when our car started making an ominous clanking noise. I'm no mechanic, but even I knew this wasn't good. We limped along for a few more miles before the engine gave out completely, leaving us stranded on a lonely stretch of highway as the sun began to set. "There's got to be a town nearby," Sarah said, peering at her phone, "but I'm not getting any signal out here." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. We passed a sign a few miles back. Silver Creek, I think it said. Can't be too far. We gathered what we could carry and started walking. The November air was crisp, and a light fog had begun to roll in, obscuring the road ahead. As we walked, the silence struck me. No crickets, no rustling of small animals in the grass, just our footsteps and the occasional gust of wind. After what felt like hours, we saw lights in the distance. Relief washed over us as we quickened our pace. Silver Creek emerged from the mist like a mirage, a small cluster of buildings that looked like they hadn't changed much since the 1950s. The town was eerily quiet for early evening. No cars on the streets, no people walking about. Most of the storefronts were dark, but we spotted a diner with its lights still on. "Thank God," Sarah muttered. "Maybe they have a phone we can use." As we approached the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The neon "open" sign flickered erratically, and through the windows, I could see a few patrons sitting unnaturally still in their booths. The bell above the door jangled as we entered, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet diner. Every head turned to look at us, moving in perfect unison. Their eyes, there was something wrong with their eyes. They were glassy, unfocused, like those of a taxidermied animal. Hi," Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly. "Our car broke down a few miles back. Could we use your phone to call a tow truck?" For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all smiled. It wasn't a warm or welcoming smile. It was mechanical, rehearsed, like they were trying to remember how smiling worked. A waitress approached us, her movements stiff and jerky. "Welcome to Silver Creek," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "We don't get many visitors here." "I can see why," I muttered under my breath. Sarah elbowed me in the ribs. "About that phone," Sarah began, but the waitress continued as if she hadn't heard. "You must be tired from your journey. Why don't you sit down? Have some pie. Our cherry pie is famous in these parts." Before we could protest, she had ushered us into a booth. The other patrons were still staring, still smiling those unsettling smiles. "Look," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "We appreciate the hospitality, but we really need to get going. If we could just use your phone." Now, the waitress interrupted, her smile never wavering. "There's no need to rush off. You're our guests, and guests in Silver Creek always stay for pie." As if on cue, a man emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 plates of cherry pie. He set them down in front of us with robotic precision. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Something was very, very wrong here. "It's getting late," Sarah said, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "We should really find a place to stay for the night. Is there a motel in town?" The waitress's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, we have plenty of room for you here. Silver Creek always has room for new residents." The way she said residents sent a chill down my spine. I stood up abruptly, grabbing Sarah's hand. "Thanks for the offer, but we'll be going now." As we moved towards the door, the other patrons stood up in unison. They formed a wall between us and the exit, their faces still fixed in those eerie smiles. "Now, don't be rude," the waitress said, all pretense of friendliness gone from her voice. "You haven't even tried the pie." I looked around frantically for another way out. The kitchen, if we could just get through there, maybe we could find a back door. "Run," I whispered to Sarah. Then, louder, "Look, a UFO." It was a desperate ploy, but it worked. For just a second, every head in the diner turned to look out the window. That second was all we needed. We bolted for the kitchen, shoving past the startled cook. Behind us, I could hear the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as our pursuers gave chase. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and hanging utensils. We dodged around prep tables and vats of bubbling liquid that I was pretty sure wasn't soup. At the back, just as I'd hoped, was a door marked exit. I slammed into it with my shoulder, and we burst out into the cool night air. But our relief was short-lived. The entire town seemed to have awakened. Figures were emerging from every building, all moving towards us with that same unnatural gait. "This way," Sarah hissed, pulling me towards a narrow alley between 2 buildings. We ran, our feet pounding on the pavement, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. The alley opened up onto another street, but it was no use. They were everywhere, closing in from all sides. Their faces were all the same now, blank, emotionless, with those terrifyingly vacant eyes. "What do they want?" Sarah gasped as we backed up against a wall. As if in answer, the crowd parted, and a figure stepped forward. It was an old man, his back hunched, leaning heavily on a cane. Unlike the others, his eyes were sharp and alert. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "We've been waiting for you." "What is this place?" I demanded. "What do you want from us?" The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Silver Creek has always been here, waiting for lost souls like yourselves. We need new blood, you see, new minds to join our community." As he spoke, I noticed something odd. The other townspeople were changing. Their skin was becoming translucent, their features blurring. They looked less and less human with each passing second. "You're not really people, are you?" Sarah whispered, horror dawning on her face. The old man's smile widened impossibly. "We were once, but Silver Creek changed us, improved us, and now it's your turn." He raised his cane, and the crowd surged forward. I felt cold hands grabbing at me, pulling me down. Sarah's scream was cut short as she was engulfed by the mass of not quite human bodies. I fought, clawing and kicking, but there were too many. As I felt my consciousness slipping away, I saw the old man standing over me, his form shimmering and changing. "Welcome home," he said, and then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was lying in a bed in what looked like a quaint country inn. Sarah was next to me, still unconscious. For a moment I thought it had all been a terrible dream. Then I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror across the room. My eyes. They were different. glassy, unfocused, like those of a taxidermied animal. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Instead, it curved into a wide, unnatural smile. Through the window, I could see the sun rising over Silver Creek. It looked like a perfect small town now, straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that Sarah and I would be greeting the next lost travelers who stumbled into our little slice of Americana. Welcome to Silver Creek, where everyone smiles and no one ever leaves. The instant I saw my motorcycle disappear around the corner, I knew I'd made a catastrophic mistake. The sick feeling in my stomach wasn't just about losing my prized possession, it was the chilling realization that I had invited a predator into my life, and now he knew exactly where I lived. It had started innocently enough. I'd decided to sell my beloved Harley Davidson, a decision born more out of financial necessity than desire. The bike had been my companion through countless road trips and late-night rides, but mounting bills and a recent layoff meant sacrifices had to be made. I posted an ad online, complete with photos and a detailed description. Within hours, I received a message from a guy named Mike. He seemed genuine, asking intelligent questions about the bike's history and maintenance. We arranged to meet the next day for him to take a look. When Mike arrived, he looked the part of a seasoned rider, leather jacket, well-worn boots, and a knowledgeable glint in his eye as he circled the bike. We chatted easily about motorcycles and the open road. For a moment, I even felt a pang of regret about selling. "Mind if I take her for a spin?" Mike asked, his hand resting on the handlebar. "Just around the block, to get a feel for her." I hesitated. It wasn't an unusual request when buying a bike, but something in my gut twinged. I pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to seller's nerves. "Sure," I said, handing over the keys. "Just be careful with her." Mike's face split into a wide grin as he swung his leg over the seat. The engine roared to life, and he gave me a quick salute before pulling away from the curb. I stood there, watching as he rounded the corner at the end of my street. The sound of the engine faded, and I waited for it to grow loud again as he completed the block. But the sound never came back. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The sick feeling in my stomach grew. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police, when I saw a notification, a new message, from Mike. "Thanks for the bike, sucker. Better lock your doors tonight." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a theft. It was a threat. I rushed inside, my hands shaking as I locked every door and window. My mind raced. How could I have been so stupid? I'd invited this man to my home, shown him where I lived, and now he had my bike and, it seemed, plans to come back for more. The police were sympathetic but not particularly helpful. They took my statement, but without the bike's GPS tracker, which I had stupidly disconnected when I decided to sell. They didn't have much to go on. They promised to keep an eye out and suggested I stay with a friend for a few days. But I couldn't bring myself to leave. This was my home, and damned if I was going to let some thief scare me out of it. As night fell, every sound became magnified. The creak of the house settling sounded like footsteps. The rustle of leaves outside my window became whispered threats. Sleep was impossible. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, the low rumble of a motorcycle engine, growing louder as it approached. My heart pounded as I peered through the blinds. There, at the end of my driveway, was my Harley, and astride it, his face obscured by a helmet, was a figure I assumed was Mike. He sat there for what felt like hours, the bike idling. Was he taunting me, planning his next move? I debated calling the police again, but feared what might happen in the time it took them to arrive. Finally, the figure revved the engine and sped off into the night. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, but my relief was short-lived. This, I knew, was far from over. The next day, I was a wreck. Exhaustion and fear had left me jumpy and irritable. I called in sick to my new job, unable to focus on anything but the threat hanging over me. As I made yet another pot of coffee, my phone buzzed. Another message from Mike. Miss me? Don't worry. I'll be back. Maybe tonight, maybe not. Sweet dreams. That was it. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows and waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed to take action. I spent the day preparing. I dug out the old baseball bat from my college days and kept it close. I set up makeshift alarms on all the doors and windows, empty cans balanced precariously, ready to clatter to the ground at the slightest disturbance. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I was doing something. As darkness fell, I positioned myself in the living room, lights off, bat in hand. The hours crept by, each car passing on the street making my heart race. Just as my vigilance began to wane, I heard it, the sound of my bike, approaching slowly. This time there was no idle threat from the driveway. The engine cut off, and I heard footsteps on my front porch. The doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then silence. I gripped the bat tighter, my palms slick with sweat. For a long moment, nothing happened. Had he given up? The answer came in the form of shattering glass. He was coming through the window. I didn't think. I acted. As a dark figure climbed through the broken window, I swung the bat with all my might. There was a satisfying thunk and a cry of pain. The intruder stumbled, and I swung again, catching him in the ribs. He went down hard, cursing and gasping for breath. I fumbled for the lights, bat still raised defensively. In the sudden brightness, I got my first clear look at my tormentor. It wasn't Mike. This man was older, his face weathered and scarred. He glared up at me with a mixture of pain and rage. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. He spat blood onto my carpet. "Doesn't matter. Your buddy Mike owed me. Said I could have the bike to settle his debt. Figured I'd see what else you had worth taking." My mind reeled. Mike, the supposed buyer, had set me up. He'd used me to pay off his debts, knowing full well what kind of person he was sending my way. The sound of sirens cut through the night. A neighbor, roused by the commotion, had called the police. As the patrol car pulled up outside, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and insurance claims. The man who broke in, it turned out, had a long record of similar crimes. He was headed back to prison for a long time. My bike was recovered a few days later, abandoned in a parking lot across town. But as I stood looking at it, I felt none of the joy or excitement it had once brought me. All I could think about was the fear, the violation I'd experienced. I sold it for real this time, to a dealer. The money went towards a security system for my house. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. Some might call it paranoia. But to me, it was a small price to pay for peace of mind. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to return to normal. But something had changed in me. I found myself more cautious, more suspicious of strangers. The trust I once had in people had been shaken to its core. One day, as I was leaving work, I saw a man leaning against a motorcycle in the parking lot. For a moment, my heart raced, old fears resurging. But as I got closer, I realized it was just a coworker, admiring his new bike. "Hey!" he called out. "Want to go for a ride?" I hesitated. The old me would have jumped at the chance. But now, "Maybe another time," I said, forcing a smile as I hurried to my car. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. Not just of my bike, but of the person I used to be. The person who saw the best in people, who embraced adventure without fear. That night, I sat on my porch, looking out at the quiet street. A motorcycle roared by, the sound once so thrilling now sending a shiver down my spine. I wondered if I would ever feel that thrill again, or if the fear would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface. But as I watched the bike disappear into the distance, I made a decision. I couldn't let one bad experience define me. I couldn't let fear win. The next day, I asked my coworker about his bike, and when he offered again to take me for a ride, I took a deep breath and said yes. As we cruised down the open road, the wind in my face and the engine rumbling beneath me, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. The fear was still there, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind, but it no longer controlled me. I had faced my worst fears and come out the other side. I was changed, yes, but not broken. And as the miles rolled by, I realized that sometimes the only way past fear is through it. The open road was calling again, and this time, I was ready to answer. The moment we heard the first scream echoing through the cave system, I knew our simple hiking trip had just become a fight for survival. What we'd discover in the depths of those caverns would haunt us for the rest of our lives, if we made it out alive. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. My friends, Jake, Lisa, and Mia, and I had been planning this hiking trip for months. We were all experienced outdoors enthusiasts, but none of us had ever explored the infamous Shadowmere Caves. The local legends surrounding the cave system had always intrigued us. Tales of mysterious disappearances and strange noises in the night. We'd laughed them off as campfire stories meant to scare tourists. How wrong we were. The hike to the cave entrance was uneventful, filled with the usual banter and excitement of friends on an adventure. The weather was perfect, warm sunshine filtering through the dense forest canopy. As we approached the yawning mouth of the main cavern, a cool breeze carried the musty scent of damp earth and ancient stone. "Well, this is it," Jake said, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Shadowmere Caves. Last chance to back out." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Don't tell me you're buying into those silly ghost stories, Jake." "Of course not," he replied, a bit too quickly. "I was just saying, it's not too late to hit that brewery in town instead." Mia was already pulling out her headlamp. "No way. We didn't come all this way to chicken out now. Come on, let's go." I nodded in agreement, ignoring the slight twinge of unease in my gut. We'd come prepared with maps, extra batteries, first aid kits, everything we needed for a safe spelunking adventure. What could possibly go wrong? The first hour in the caves was breathtaking. Massive chambers opened up before us, their walls glittering with mineral deposits that caught the light of our headlamps. We carefully picked our way through narrow passages, marveling at the bizarre rock formations shaped by millennia of flowing water. It was when we reached a fork in the passage that things started to feel off. Our map showed only one path, but here were two identical tunnels stretching into the darkness. "That's weird," I muttered, double-checking the map. "This split isn't marked anywhere." Jake peered down both passages. "Maybe the map's outdated. Cave systems can change over time, right?" Lisa nodded. "True. So, which way?" We debated for a few minutes before deciding to take the left tunnel. It seemed to slope gently upward, which we hoped meant it would eventually lead us back to the surface. As we ventured deeper, the air grew noticeably colder. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and I found myself shivering despite the exertion of the hike. The walls of this tunnel were different, too, smoother, almost polished in places. And there was something else, a faint smell I couldn't quite place. "Does anyone else smell that?" Mia asked, voicing my thoughts. We all paused, sniffing the air. It was a musty odor, but with an underlying sweetness that was somehow worse. "Probably just some weird fungus," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, the tunnel gradually widening into a vast chamber. Our headlamps couldn't penetrate the full extent of the darkness. It was as we were crossing this chamber that we heard it, a scream, distant but unmistakable, echoing through the cave. We froze, exchanging wide-eyed looks of disbelief and fear. "What the hell was that?" Lisa whispered. Maybe it was just the wind," Mia suggested, her voice shaking. But we all knew it wasn't the wind. That scream had been human. "We should go back," Jake said, already turning around. Right now. I was about to agree when we heard it again, closer this time. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain. It was a battle cry. Before we could react, figures emerged from the shadows at the edges of the chamber. They moved with an unnatural speed and grace, closing in on us from all sides. In the beam of my headlamp, I caught glimpses of pale, almost translucent skin and eyes that reflected the light like a cat's. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Mia's arm and pulling her towards the tunnel we'd come from. We sprinted back the way we came, the sound of pursuit close behind us. The smooth walls of the tunnel now seemed malevolent, as if the very cave was against us. We skidded around a corner and found ourselves face to face with a dead end that hadn't been there before. "This is impossible," Lisa gasped. "We came this way." But there was no time to puzzle it out. Our pursuers were getting closer. We pressed ourselves against the wall, desperately searching for any kind of escape route. That's when I saw it, a narrow crack in the rock face, barely visible in the shadows. "There!" I shouted, pointing. "We can squeeze through." One by one, we forced ourselves into the crevice. It was a tight fit, the rough stone scraping against our skin as we inched forward. I went last, and just as I pulled my legs in, I felt something grab at my ankle. I kicked out blindly and heard a hiss of pain. Whatever had hold of me let go, and I scrambled deeper into the crack. We emerged into another chamber, smaller than the last, but with multiple tunnels branching off in different directions. Without discussing it, we picked one at random and ran, our footsteps echoing off the walls. After what felt like hours of frantic flight, we finally stopped to catch our breath. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but the oppressive silence that replaced it was almost worse. What were those things?" Mia panted, her face pale in the glow of our headlamps. Nobody had an answer. We were lost, hunted, in a cave system that seemed to defy the laws of nature and logic. Our map was useless, our supplies dwindling, and our chances of finding our way out growing slimmer by the minute. As we huddled together, trying to decide our next move, a low growl echoed through the tunnel. It was followed by the scrape of claws on stone, growing closer. "We need to move," Jake whispered urgently. "Now." But as we turned to flee once more, we saw them, pale figures blocking our escape, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They were humanoid, but with elongated limbs and fingers that ended in wicked claws. Their mouths were filled with needle-sharp teeth, bared in feral grins. We were trapped. Just as I was sure this was the end, a new sound filled the cave, a high-pitched, keening wail that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The creatures surrounding us recoiled, covering what passed for their ears. A blinding light flooded the chamber, and through my squinted eyes, I saw new figures entering the fray. They were tall, willowy beings that seemed to glow from within. In their hands, they held weapons that looked like they were made of pure light. What followed was a battle unlike anything I'd ever seen or could have imagined. The pale, feral creatures fought with savage ferocity, but they were no match for the glowing beings and their light weapons. In a matter of minutes, it was over. One of the glowing figures approached us. Up close, I could see that its face was eerily beautiful, with features that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. "You should not be here," it said, its voice resonating in my head rather than my ears. "This place is not for your kind." We got lost," I managed to stammer. "Please, we just want to go home." The being regarded us silently for a moment, then nodded. "We will guide you to the surface, but you must never return, and you must never speak of what you've seen here." In a daze, we followed our luminous saviors through the twisting tunnels. The journey passed in a blur, and before I knew it, we were stumbling out into the sunlight, blinking and disoriented. When we turned back, the cave entrance was gone, replaced by a solid rock face as if it had never existed. We never spoke about what happened in those caves, not even among ourselves. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those inhuman screams echoing in my dreams, and I wonder about the war raging beneath our feet, in a world we were never meant to see. The next time someone suggests a cave exploration, I'll be the first to recommend that brewery instead. Some depths, I've learned, are better left unplumbed. The mysteries of the underground will remain just that, mysteries, and maybe, just maybe, that's for the best. The first flicker of the headlights in our rearview mirror filled me with relief. The second made me uneasy. By the third, as they grew larger and brighter, I knew with chilling certainty that whoever was behind us wasn't here to help. They were hunting us. It had started as a simple family road trip. My wife, Sarah, our 2 kids, Emily 8 and Max 6, and I had decided to take the scenic route to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. We'd been driving for hours, the kids getting restless in the back seat, when I saw a sign for a shortcut. Willow Creek Road, 30 miles shorter to Millbrook, it proclaimed in faded letters. Sarah had given me a skeptical look. "Are you sure about this, Dan? It's getting dark and we don't know the area." I'd brushed off her concerns. "It'll be fine. We'll save an hour at least. Plus, it'll be an adventure. Right, kids?" Emily and Max had cheered from the back seat, excited by the prospect of an adventure. If only I'd known what kind of adventure we were really in for. At first, the road seemed fine. A little rough, maybe, with more twists and turns than I'd expected, but nothing our SUV couldn't handle. But as we drove deeper into the forest, the trees pressing in on either side, I began to have second thoughts. The road narrowed, turning from asphalt to gravel, then to little more than a dirt track. Our headlights cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating a path that seemed to grow wilder with each passing mile. "Dan, I really think we should turn back," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "This doesn't feel right." I was about to agree when our engine made a sound that turned my blood to ice, a sputtering, coughing noise that I knew all too well meant trouble. "No, no, no," I muttered, easing off the gas, but it was too late. The engine gave one final, violent shudder and died, leaving us coasting to a stop in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, we sat in stunned silence, the sudden quiet broken only by the soft ping of the cooling engine. "Daddy?" Max's small voice came from the back seat. "Why did we stop?" I turned to face my family, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's okay, buddy. The car's just having a little problem. We'll figure it out." But as I stepped out to check under the hood, I knew we were in serious trouble. I'm no mechanic, but even I could see that this was beyond my abilities to fix. We were stranded. I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd see. No signal, of course. Sarah joined me outside, her face pale in the fading light. "What are we going to do, Dan?" I took a deep breath, trying to think logically. "Okay, we have some food and water in the cooler, blankets in the trunk. We'll be fine for the night. In the morning, I'll walk back to the main road, find some help." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We both knew that in the morning was a long time away. We did our best to make the kids comfortable, turning the back of the SUV into a makeshift bed. As they drifted off to sleep, Sarah and I sat in the front, talking in low voices about our options. That's when we saw the first flicker of light in the distance. Hope surged through me. Another car, someone who could help us. But as the lights grew closer, that hope turned to unease. The approaching vehicle was moving erratically, speeding up and slowing down, its headlights sweeping across the road as if searching for something or someone. "Dan," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm. "Something's not right." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Wake the kids, quietly. We need to get out of the car." As Sarah roused Emily and Max, I grabbed the emergency backpack from the trunk. Flashlight, first aid kit, some snacks, and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. We had just made it to the tree line when the other vehicle came into view. It was a battered pickup truck, its engine roaring as it approached our stranded SUV. From our hiding spot, we watched as two men got out. Even in the dim light, I could see they were rough-looking characters, the kind you'd cross the street to avoid in the city. "Check the car," one of them barked. "They can't have gone far." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Max whimpered softly, and I clamped my hand over his mouth, praying the men wouldn't hear. As they searched our car, their angry shouts growing louder with each passing moment, I knew we couldn't stay here. Sooner or later, they'd start searching the woods. "We need to move," I whispered to Sarah. "Deeper into the forest. Now." She nodded, her face a mask of fear and determination. Taking Emily's hand, she began to lead the way into the darkness. I followed with Max, constantly looking over my shoulder. We stumbled through the underbrush, trying to be as quiet as possible while putting distance between us and the road. The forest was alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the leaf litter. Every noise made us jump, sure that our pursuers were right behind us. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we stopped in a small clearing. The kids were exhausted, their faces streaked with tears. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emily whispered. Sarah pulled her close. "I know, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. Daddy and I won't let anything happen to you." I wished I felt as confident as I tried to sound. The truth was, I was terrified. We were lost in an unfamiliar forest, being hunted by men whose intentions I didn't want to imagine, with 2 young children to protect. It was a nightmare scenario, and I had no idea how to get us out of it. A sudden crack of a branch breaking nearby made us all freeze. I gestured for Sarah to take the kids and hide behind a fallen log, while I crouched behind a tree, my heart in my throat. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, swinging back and forth as heavy footsteps approached. I held my breath, praying that the kids would stay quiet. "I know you're out here," a gruff voice called out. "Make it easy on yourselves and come on out. We just want to talk." I didn't believe that for a second. These men hadn't chased us into the forest in the middle of the night just to talk. The footsteps grew closer. I could see the man now, his face half illuminated by his flashlight. He was big, with a scraggly beard and eyes that darted back and forth, searching. He was going to find us. It was only a matter of time. I had to do something. Taking a deep breath, I picked up a rock and threw it as far as I could in the opposite direction. It clattered against a tree, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. The man's head snapped towards the noise. "Got you now," he muttered, moving away from us. As soon as he was out of sight, I rushed to Sarah and the kids. We have to keep moving," I whispered. "They're spreading out, searching the woods." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. We set off again, moving as quietly as we could, constantly alert for any sign of our pursuers. As we walked, my mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. We couldn't keep this up forever. The kids were exhausted, and honestly, so were Sarah and I. We needed help, and soon. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, too steady to be a flashlight. A house? A ranger station? Whatever it was our best hope. "Look," I whispered, pointing. "Light, we're going to head that way, okay?" We moved faster now, hope giving us renewed energy. The light grew brighter, and soon we could make out the shape of a small cabin. Just as we reached the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, I heard shouts behind us. They'd picked up our trail. "Run!" I yelled, abandoning all attempts at stealth. We sprinted across the open ground, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind us. Emily stumbled, and I scooped her up without breaking stride. We reached the cabin door just as our pursuers broke from the tree line. Sarah pounded on the door, screaming for help. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the door flew open, revealing an older man holding a shotgun. "Get in," he barked, his eyes widening as he took in our terrified faces and the men running towards us. We didn't need to be told twice. We dove inside, and the man slammed the door shut behind us, throwing the bolt just as our pursuers reached the porch. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his shotgun still at the ready. "What's going on here?" Between gasps for breath, we managed to explain our situation. The man's face hardened as he listened. "Damn Hawkins boys," he muttered. "Been terrorizing folks around here for years." He moved to an old-fashioned phone on the wall, the first working phone we'd seen in hours, and started dialing. "This is Tom Granger out on Old Mill Road," he said into the receiver. "Got a family here being chased by the Hawkins gang. Send everyone you've got." As we waited for the police to arrive, huddled in the safety of Tom's cabin, I held my family close. We were safe, at least for now. But I knew that the memory of this night would stay with us for a long time. Our shortcut had turned into the longest night of our lives. A nightmare that could have ended much differently if not for a bit of luck and the kindness of a stranger. As I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching, I made a silent vow. No more shortcuts, no more reckless decisions. From now on, the safety of my family would always come first. The flashing lights of the police cars lit up the clearing, and for the first time since our car had broken down, I felt like I could breathe again. We had survived. We were together. And that, I realized, was the greatest adventure